What's up, YouTube? What's up, my brother? I want to make some comments on the video that you made regarding Black History Month and how you feel that it's a joke or that it's basically pitiful that they're only the establishment is only relegating 1 month for Black people to study their history. I want to make some points. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you, but I want to make this important point. It's important that we do have Black History Month. And I sort of agree with you that the establishment might be making a joke out of it that we're only using 1 month to actually honor it or to study it. But let me tell you something about history. Um, there's this guy, Dr. Henry Clark, who's a self-taught Black historian. And when he was a young kid, his mother used to be like a domestic worker down in the South in Alabama. And his mother would take him to work with him, and in the house would be like tons and tons of books. And as a young kid, Dr. Henry Clark would always be um, interested in things like Africa or where his people came from. So he asked the guy who his mother worked for where he can get some books to learn more about his people, his Black people or his African people. And the guy basically told him that, well, I'm sorry, John, your people haven't accomplished anything. There are no books telling you about your people. And at that point, Dr. Henry Clark knew the guy must be lying. So it was his destiny to set out on a journey to learn about his people. So Dr. Henry Clark started going to the libraries to learn about his people. And mind you, this was deep south in Alabama where they wouldn't even let Black people into libraries. But make a long story short, Dr. Henry Clark became one of our greatest Black scholars on African history. Or so that with that said, um, my experience with Black history, the only thing I knew about Black history was Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, um, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Cypric Actus, the guy who was first the black guy, the first black guy to die in the Revolutionary War. Those are the only thing I knew about Black history. And then when I entered high school, we had to do a paper on a great leader or a great figure in America. And I went to a predominantly white high school, and there was like one other Black kid in the class with me. And he asked me who I was doing my paper on. And I said, I'm doing my paper at Andrew Jackson. And he kind of laughed at me. The President Andrew Jackson, I guess he was like the third or fourth president, the second president of the United States. So I was going to do my paper on him. And he kind of laughed at me and said, man, you should do your paper on somebody Black. I said, do my paper on somebody Black. I said, who, Harriet Tubman? No, man, don't do Harriet Tubman. Everybody knows her, she's not the only Black figure. So I said, well, I don't know any other Black figures to do my paper on. So he said, why don't you do it on Martin Luther King? So I ended up doing a paper on Martin Luther King and ended up getting an A plus on it. But at the time, I had forgotten all about Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968 when I was 10 years old. And I really didn't know who Martin Luther King was until he was assassinated. I knew there was a civil rights movement going on, but I didn't really understand what the civil rights movement was all about. I'm only 10. So that was my knowledge of Black history until I came into contact with the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad when he started teaching things like the greatness of Africa and the greatness of Black people, and that the Black man has actually 66 trillion years of history. So when he basically said the Black man had 66 trillion years of history, at the time, I really didn't understand that concept. And I think most people who were in the nation really didn't understand what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was talking about when he said that the black man has 66 trillion years of history. What he meant was that since our minds are unable to contain the concept of infinity or forever, he picked an arbitrary large number so that our mind could contain that ideal or that concept of how long our history goes. So when you talk about black history, you're not only talking about the history of black people, you're talking about world history, or you're talking about the history of humanity. Dr. Henry Clark, one of our greatest black historians, when he was a kid growing up in Alabama, like during the 1920s or 1930s, his mother, he used to go to work with his mother, who was a domestic worker who worked for this white lawyer and cleaning his house. And this white lawyer had all kinds of books in his library den. And Dr. Henry Clark would just scan the books and be fascinated. And he always had a curiosity for his people because he understood how his people were treated in the South during those times. And he wanted to learn something about his people. So he asked the guy if the guy would give him some books or let him read some books about or teach him about his people history here and abroad. And the white guy basically told him, "Well, I'm sorry, John. Your people have accomplished nothing. There are no books on your people." And at that moment, Dr. Henry Clark realized that this guy was lying to him. So he made it his manifest destiny and or his journey, if you will, to go out and seek and find the truth about his people. So he basically was self-taught and went to the library and just studied everything he can on African history. And a whole new world opened up to him. So when he migrated up here, up north to New York, up into Harlem, there's a center called the Schomburg Theater. A guy named Schomburg, who's of African and Puerto Rican ancestry. There's a center up there where they have all kinds of history about black world history here and abroad. And John Henry Clark asked Schomburg to teach him more about black history. And Schomburg said to him, "Go out and study world history first. And when you do that, then you come back to me and ask me about black history." And that's what Dr. Henry Clark did. He went out and studied world history. And then when he studied world history, within there, he found black history because black history is world history. So this entire history of the world is black history. So don't look at black history as being 1 month. The entire history is yours. In other words, black people were first on the stage in world history. So, the importance of history. One thing I want to say about the importance of history, Marcus Garvey Jr. said it best when he said, "A people without a knowledge of the history is like a tree without fruit." Now, history is to a people what a mother's breast is to a newborn baby. A newborn baby needs the suckling of his mother's breast in order to sustain itself and to nurture and grow. A people need their history in order to sustain themselves and to nurture and grow. History is like a compass that's going to tell you where you're going, where you've been, how you got there, where you are at today. History is like a guide, it's like the North Star, and as you navigate through life as you will. Uh, Whenever a people are to be destroyed or whenever a people are to be conquered, one of the first things they do is take away that people's history. Our history have been taken away from us. Our history have been stolen from us.